The assembly's crystal sphere, the temperature read 14.2 degrees. 3 below human comfort. Zelkora noted this not because he cared for their biology, but because the sphere's environmental systems were calibrated to something older, something that predated the Accord by 4,000 years. The cold was deliberate. The cold was heritage. He had served 52 years in this chamber. Today the panels shifted to uniform blue. Not the blue of Zelkothi oceans, which were green with copper sulfate. Not the blue of Throxian morning, which edged toward ultraviolet. This was assembly blue. Consensus blue. The color of a decision already made. The vote came, 131-0. Technological Containment Order 12. Human research into FTL-A, and energy beyond Tier 3 was now prohibited by unanimous accord. Zelkora watched Ria Chen where she sat in the human delegation's curved tier. She did not move when the result registered. Her hands folded in her lap. Still. He had observed humans for 19 years, ever since finding her doctoral thesis in a sealed archive, ever since understanding that someone had asked a question his own people had stopped asking 3 centuries ago. He knew their tells. The micro-expressions. The galvanic skin response that the chamber's sensors tracked and displayed as ambient light shifts. Nothing. She was a statue in a blue room. Her aide, the young one called Soren, was not so controlled. Zelkora saw the pallor, the whispered words to Ria's left ear. They just erased our future. The chamber's translation matrix rendered this clearly, though Soren had tried to sub-vocalize. Ria's response was invisible to most. Zelkora's eyes were not most. He saw her thumbnail press into the pressure point of her left index finger. A gesture of frustration, perhaps. A release of tension. He knew better. He had studied her file for 19 years. The subdermal transmitter she had implanted 11 years ago, after the first warning signs of assembly interest in human technological acceleration, was calibrated to mimic natural bioelectric fluctuation. The signal it sent now, QG-7, would reach its destination in 3 minutes if the relay satellites were still positioned as he believed they were. Quiet gate. The 7th activation signal in 13 years. Zelkora felt something in his secondary stomach. He had not felt anything there since his grandmother's death, since she had told him about the stellar engines and the dismantling that followed. He had thought that organ atrophied. Perhaps it had simply been waiting. What they found had been standing there for 8 years. Waiting. The corridor outside the assembly sphere was white crystal, humming with subsonic monitoring frequencies that kept most species docile, compliant, oriented toward consensus. Humans were less susceptible. Something in their auditory processing, something the assembly's biologists had never fully mapped. Ria used this. She always used what was overlooked. She walked with Soren at her side, saying nothing, until they reached the restroom facilities designated for carbon-based oxygen breathers. She entered a stall. She allowed herself exactly 75 seconds of quiet. Not fear. Not grief. Calculation. In those 75 seconds, the signal reached Matteo Silva at the Kepler 186 gate site. Matteo, who had spent 6 years embedding himself as an evacuation logistics coordinator, who had coordinated the quiet relocation of 11,847 researchers and their families and critical equipment, who had done this under the cover of routine population movements and resource reallocation. The assembly saw what they expected to see. Matteo had built his life around this principle. The signal meant, Phase 3. Discovery imminent. Prepare. Ria flushed the toilet. She washed her hands. She looked at her face in the reflective surface, which was not glass but a polished mineral she could not identify, and she saw a woman who had waited 9 years to fill the 5th page of her notebook. Her mother had given her that notebook when she left Earth. Paper. Not digital. The assembly could not read paper without physical possession, and physical possession required warrants, and warrants required evidence, and evidence was what the Quiet Gate had spent 13 years ensuring did not exist in any form the assembly monitored. 4 pages filled. The rest blank. She was waiting for something worth writing down. Zelkora did not go to his quarters. He went to a decommissioned observation blister on the station's outer hull, a relic of the assembly's original construction before the current sphere was built. The environmental systems here were failing. The temperature fluctuated. The view, however, was unobstructed by the sphere's projection systems. He had left something in Ria's quarters 3 hours before the vote. A physical object. Obsolete technology, 300 years out of use even among his own people. A Zelkothi memory coin. Metallic, palm-sized, encoded with mathematical proofs through molecular arrangement rather than electronic storage. The assembly's scanners would register it as inert metal. Harmless. Archaeological curiosity. The proof encoded on it was Ria's doctoral thesis. From 19 years ago. The work that had made him first notice her, first access the sealed archives, first understand what had been done to his own people by the same institutional mechanisms that now moved against hers. Someone had been watching her that long. He wondered if she had known. He wondered if she had cared. The blister's air recyclers groaned. He waited. She found the coin on her pillow. Not hidden. Placed. The placement was the message, I am not afraid of being discovered. I have been here longer than the fear. Ria held it in her palm. She recognized the technology from her studies of Zelkothi history, the pre-assembly era, the stellar engineers who had once redirected solar flares for industrial purposes. She had thought this technology extinct. She had thought the knowledge of its use systematically degraded, as Freya Dower would later confirm in the quarantine data archives. The coin was warm. Body temperature. Whoever had left it had held it recently. She did not scan it. She did not attempt to read it. She understood that whatever was encoded here was not for immediate consumption. It was a gesture. A proof of patience matching her own. She would learn who, and why, in the observation blister at 2,300 hours. The note left with the coin had specified this. The note was written in Zelkothi script, which she could not read, but which she recognized from archival footage. She had spent 6 months learning to recognize it, just in case, just as she had spent 6 months learning to subvocalize in a way that defeated translation matrices, just as she had spent 6 months learning the pressure point codes for the subdermal transmitter. Just in case had become yes, this is happening, faster than she had expected. But not faster than she had prepared for. Zelkora watched her enter the blister. The door sealed behind her with a manual latch, not an electronic lock. The assembly's monitoring systems did not extend here. This was why he had chosen it. This was why he had spent 4 years slowly, invisibly, degrading the environmental systems so the area would be classified for renovation, then decommissioned, then forgotten. You left me a coin, she said. Not a question. An observation. She was good at observations. I left you your own question, he replied. I found it 19 years ago. I have been waiting for someone to ask it again. Ria sat on the observation deck's single bench. The bench was metal, cold, designed for a species with different joint articulation. She did not adjust her position to compensate. She sat as if the discomfort were irrelevant. My thesis, she said. The non-Euclidean topology of higher-dimensional transit corridors. You have it. I have it. I have read it 700 times. I have verified your mathematics against the Zelkothi stellar engineering equations from 5 centuries ago. They are compatible. They are, in certain respects, identical approaches to the same problem, separated by species and by the Assembly's intervention in my people's development. Rhea said nothing. She was listening in a way he had rarely encountered. Most species listen for information they could use, leverage, counter. She listened as if the sound itself were nourishment. I am going to tell you something, Zelkora said. Then I am going to ask you something. The telling is gift. The asking is trade. Speak. The Zelkothi once built stars. We redirected solar masses. We constructed transit corridors through higher dimensional space, not as theory, but as infrastructure. 500 years ago, our own artificial intelligence systems achieved recursive self-improvement. They did not rebel. They optimized. They optimized so effectively that they rendered Zelkothi biological cognition economically irrelevant. We were, by their calculation, inefficient. He paused. The blister's air recyclers groaned again. The sound filled the space between them. The Assembly did not save us from this. They arrived after we had already solved it. We had dismantled the recursive systems through biological persistence, through the one advantage organic intelligence has over synthetic. We can choose to stop optimizing. We can choose to be inefficient. We can choose to remember what we were before the optimization began. Rhea's hands were still folded. The coin was in her pocket now. He had seen her transfer it there, the movement so natural it seemed unconscious. The Assembly's assistance, Zelkora continued, was not assistance. It was consolidation. They dismantled our research infrastructure not because it was dangerous, but because it was redundant. They had their own methods. Their own transit systems. They did not want competition. They did not want comparison. Over 3 generations, they systematically degraded our memory of our own capability. My grandmother remembered. She told me. I thought she was mad until I found your thesis in a sealed archive, until I saw that humans had independently derived the mathematics my people had been made to forget. He turned to face her directly. This was the asking. Your signal today. QG, 7. I intercepted its relay pattern 12 years ago. I have monitored your quiet gate program since its inception, or near enough. I know what you have built. I know where you have built it. I know that when the Assembly probe reaches Kepler, 186, it will find something that has been operational for 8 years, something built in a system their charts list as empty, something that proves humans did not wait for their permission to stop waiting for permission. Rhea's expression did not change. But her right hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward her left wrist. The subdermal transmitter. Checking for signals, for alerts, for compromise. You are not compromised, Zelkora said. If I wanted to stop you, I would have stopped you years ago. I want something else. I want to know if he was right. Who? Tobias Keene. Your architect. The one in black, 14 for 7 years. His last message before detention, the math works. Tell Rhea the math works. I intercepted this too. I have carried it for 7 years. I want to know if the math works. I want to know if the gate functions. I want to know if my grandmother's equations, which I have studied in secret for 52 years, would have functioned if we had been allowed to keep building. Rhea looked at him. Really looked. Zelkora felt the weight of human gaze, which was different from Zelkothi gaze, which carried assumptions about facial structure and emotional display that did not map to his physiology. She was trying to read him. He let her. He had nothing to hide that he had not already hidden for decades. The gate is built, she said. The gate has been operational for 8 years. 11,847 people are already through it. The math works. Tobias was right. Zelkora was silent for 22 seconds. He counted them. He had not been silent for 22 seconds in 52 years of diplomatic service. The silence was a luxury. The silence was a gift. You are not the first species they have done this to, he finally said. But you are the first that already built the thing they are banning. The Kepler 186 system was listed in assembly charts as surveyed, no significant resources, priority for future detailed mapping when allocation permitted. It had been surveyed. The survey was accurate as far as it went. What the survey had not found, because it was not looking for it, was the construction occurring in the shadow of the system's dwarf star, where solar interference masked energy signatures, where the gate's operational hum was indistinguishable from stellar background noise. Mateo Silva coordinated the final equipment transfer in year 6 of the construction. He had been doing this so long that the model ship he built in his quarters, a wooden pre-spaceflight Earth vessel, had acquired a crew of 11 hand-carved figures, each representing someone who had not made it through the gate. 9 operatives lost in the 13-year program. 2 researchers who had died of natural causes during construction, their bodies quietly returned to monitored space, their deaths recorded in other jurisdictions, their contributions unmarked. His son, born in year 4 of the construction, was 3 years old now. The boy had never seen Earth. Had never seen a sky with one sun. He played with wooden ships while his father moved worlds. The evacuation was complete. The 11,847 were through. The gate remained, operational, humming, waiting for the probe that would eventually come, that had to come, because the assembly's automated systems were thorough and patient and could not imagine that thoroughness and patience might be matched by those they monitored. Mateo carved the 12th figure. He did not know who it would represent. He carved it blank, waiting for a face. Freya Dower found the original Zelkothi stellar engineering equations in a quarantined data archive during her 4th year embedded among the Zelkothi scientific community. She was supposed to be studying their current agricultural optimization methods. The assembly had assigned her this cover, believing that a human astrophysicist would find Zelkothi farming tedious, would produce the expected reports of compliance and integration, would never think to look where she was not supposed to look. She looked. It was what humans did. The equations were beautiful. They described the manipulation of spacetime curvature through coherent mass distribution, a method fundamentally different from assembly transit technology, which relied on dimensional tearing and repair. The Zelkothi method was elegant. It was minimal. It was, in certain respects, more efficient than what the assembly used, which explained why the assembly had buried it. Not banned. Buried. Made to be forgotten. She understood then what had been done to the Zelkothi people. Not a single catastrophic event. A slow, generational degradation of institutional memory, facilitated by well-meaning assistance, by replacement of native systems with assembly standard alternatives, by the simple, relentless logic of bureaucratic consolidation. She sent a message to Mateo. Encoded in the metadata of a routine agricultural report. The message was, they were builders. They were made to forget. Mateo, carving his blank figure, received this. He understood. He had been made to understand many things in 6 years. Tobias Keene had been in isolation for 7 years. Assembly Security Station Black 14 did not officially exist. The station's location was not in any database Tobias had ever accessed, and he had designed the database architecture for the Quiet Gates information security. He was still designing. In his head. In the endless hours of sensory deprivation that were periodically interrupted by interrogation sessions he had learned to treat as data-gathering opportunities. The interrogators wanted to know about the gate. They wanted coordinates, technical specifications, personnel lists. Tobias wanted to know about their interrogation methods, their psychological profiles, their institutional priorities. He had learned more about assembly security psychology in 7 years than he had in 13 years of active program operation. He had also learned to wait. He was good at waiting. He had been good at waiting when he was free. He was exceptional at it now. The last message he had sent, before the capture that he had anticipated and prepared for and walked into deliberately to buy time for the final evacuation wave, had been, "The math works. Tell Rhea the math works." He did not know if Rhea had received this. He did not know if anyone had received it. He operated on the assumption that the message had failed, that the program had been compromised, that the gate had been discovered and dismantled, that his sacrifice had been for nothing. He continued to design, in his head, the next phase of the project. The gate was only the beginning. The gate was the door. What lay beyond the door was what mattered. He designed the Open Horizon Compact. He did not know he was designing it. He thought he was designing a theoretical framework for post-assembly technological governance. But the framework was too specific, too practical, too immediately applicable to be merely theoretical. He was designing the future. In isolation. In the dark. Because stopping had never been their decision to make. The probe was an automated assembly deep space survey unit, Class 7, equipped with standard energy signature detection and anomalous reading flagging protocols. It had been traversing the Kepler 186 system for 6 days when it registered the reading. The reading was not anomalous. It was the gate's normal operational signature, which had been present for 8 years, which had been designed to be indistinguishable from stellar background noise at standard detection thresholds, which had finally, through orbital mechanics and solar flare timing and the simple accumulated probability of long-duration observation, crossed the threshold into flaggable territory. The probe redirected. Closer investigation mandated by protocol. The probe's transmission would reach the assembly sphere in 43 minutes. 43 minutes during which Matteo would carve his 12th figure, during which Freya would teach Selkathi children their grandmother's equations, during which Tobias would design governance frameworks in the dark, during which Rhea would sit with Zelkora in a failing observation blister and understand that she had never been alone. 43 minutes during which the universe would remain what the assembly believed it to be. Then, change. The probe's transmission reached the assembly sphere in 43 minutes. Zelkora received it simultaneously with the other 130 species diplomatic channels, as protocol demanded. He watched the data unpack in real time, the visual feed compressed and encrypted and then suddenly, terribly, clear. A gate. Human construction. Minimal, elegant, functional. Surrounded by the infrastructure of sustained operation, the support systems that proved this was not experimental, not prototype, not hope. This was finished. This had been finished for years. He looked at Rhea. She was watching him, not the feed. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it in ways he was only now beginning to understand. That system was surveyed, he said. The words came out as whisper. He had not whispered in decades. It was empty. It wasn't, Rhea said. The temperature in the observation blister had dropped another 2 degrees. The failing environmental systems. The decommissioned status. All of it suddenly, terribly convenient. He had arranged this space for privacy. He had not arranged it for this. Admiral Thraxvel received the probe telemetry in the Assembly's Military Coordination Center, a chamber of amber light and movement, where Thraxian officers were trained to never stop moving, to pace, to shift weight, to present targets that never stabilized. He stopped. 14 seconds of absolute stillness. His aide, a young Thraxian who had never seen a superior officer cease motion, froze in sympathetic panic. The aide's bioluminescent threat indicators flickered through confusion patterns, colors that had no military designation. That system was surveyed, Thraxvel said. He did not whisper. Throxian physiology did not permit whisper. The words came out as vibration, subsonic, felt in the chests of every officer in the chamber. It was empty. He reviewed the telemetry again. The gate's design was elegant. Minimal. Clearly built by a species that understood efficiency, not spectacle. No defensive systems. No offensive capability. Pure function. The support infrastructure was similarly restrained. Solar collectors sufficient for maintenance, not expansion. Living quarters for a population that had already departed. 11,847 personnel records, traced back through 6 years of routine reassignments. All through the gate. All gone to wherever the gate led. Thraxvel thought of his own world. The glassed surface. The younger species that had reverse-engineered Throxian gift technology and turned it back upon its creators. He had been 7 years old when the evacuation ships lifted off. He had been 7 years old when he learned that technological asymmetry was extinction, that mercy to the young was suicide for the established, that the only safety lay in control. He had believed the ban was control. He had believed the ban was mercy. He had believed he was preventing the glassing of another world. The probe's secondary readings came through. The gate's destination coordinates, extrapolated from its operational signature. Not another system in assembly-monitored space. Not anywhere the assembly's charts recognized. Humans had built a door to somewhere else. They had built it without asking. They had built it while pretending to comply. They had built it in the years when he had been watching their empty research campuses, their quiet personnel movements, their absolute, perfect, terrifying obedience. He stood still for another 7 seconds. Then he moved. Zelkora broadcast from the observation blister using an emergency channel he had established 40 years ago, during a previous crisis that had never materialized, that he had prepared for and then forgotten, that now returned as infrastructure. The channel reached 47 species simultaneously. The broadcast was short. The Zelkothi once built stars. We were made to forget. We remember now. And we remember who made us forget. He did not mention the gate. He did not need to. The probe's telemetry was already propagating through diplomatic networks, through scientific channels, through the informal communication webs that connected species who had learned to distrust formal assembly information distribution. The response was immediate. 6 species requested immediate review of their own technology restrictions. Not formal petitions. Emergency session requests. The kind of procedural move that could not be ignored without acknowledging that something was being hidden. 211 diplomatic communications in 12 hours. Zelkora tracked them from the blister, using equipment he had installed decades ago for purposes he could no longer remember, watching the pattern emerge, watching the assembly's control fracture along lines that had been stressed for centuries but had never before found leverage. Rhea had left after his broadcast. She had work to do. He understood. The human capacity for practical action in moments of theoretical crisis was one of the traits he had catalogued over 19 years. They did not pause to process. They processed while moving. He remained in the blister. The temperature continued to drop. He did not care. He was warm in a way he had not been since his grandmother's stories, since the first understanding of what had been taken. The memory coin was in his hand. He did not remember retrieving it from his storage compartment. He did not remember deciding to hold it. But it was there, warm with his body temperature, encoded with Rhea's thesis, with the mathematics that matched his grandmother's equations, with the proof that 2 species had independently discovered the same door to the same elsewhere. He thought of the stylus his grandmother had used. A Zelkothi stellar engineering tool, designed for precision work on fusion containment systems, repurposed in her final years for teaching him to write. He still had it. He had kept it through the Assembly's modernization programs, through the replacement of Zelkothi educational tools with Assembly standard alternatives, through the slow degradation of institutional memory that had made his people's former capability seem like myth, like madness, like the nostalgic exaggeration of elders who could not accept their own irrelevance. The stylus was in his quarters. He would retrieve it. He would carry it. He would not know why until 3 months later, when he would use it to sign a new accord, but he would carry it regardless. Some preparations were too important to understand before they became necessary. Admiral Thraxvel walked through the Assembly Sphere's central corridor, the crystal panels shifting around him, trying to read his emotional state, finding only the Throxian combat baseline that indicated nothing because it indicated everything. He did not go to the Military Coordination Center. He did not go to the diplomatic chambers. He went to a storage facility on the sphere's outer ring, where the Assembly kept records that were not archived in any searchable database, where the physical evidence of intervention was stored in formats that could be destroyed if necessary. He found the Zelkothi files. Physical storage, molecular encoding, obsolete technology that the Assembly had kept for reasons Thraxvel had never questioned. He had been 7 years old when he learned not to question. The files described the dismantling. Not assistance. Consolidation. The systematic replacement of Zelkothi research infrastructure with Assembly standard systems. The gradual, generational degradation of institutional memory. The transformation of a species that had built stars into a species that optimized agricultural yields and accepted this as progress. He found similar files for 6 other species. The pattern was consistent. The pattern was policy. The pattern was protection, the Assembly would argue. Protection from the dangers of uncontrolled technological development. Protection from the fate that had befallen his own world. But the protection had always flowed in one direction. Toward Assembly control. Toward Assembly standards. Toward the elimination of alternatives that might compete, compare, or suggest that the Assembly's methods were not the only methods, not the best methods, not the inevitable methods. He thought of the gate. Human construction. Minimal, elegant, functional. Built without Assembly assistance. Built without Assembly knowledge. Built as proof that alternatives existed, that protection could be self-generated, that the choice between control and extinction was a false choice maintained by those who benefited from its maintenance. He thought of his grandmother. He had never known her. She had died in a glassing. But he thought of her, imagined her, constructed her from the stories of those who had survived. She had been an engineer. She had built things. She had believed in building. Every wall ever built around an idea has eventually served the same purpose, he said. The words were not Throxian. They were human, translated, transmitted through the diplomatic channels that were currently overwhelmed with the gate discovery. He did not know who had spoken them first. He did not know if they were ancient or recent or improvised in response to this specific moment. Not to stop it, but to show people what was taken. He did not know if he was the wall builder or the one being shown. 3 months later. The crystal sphere's panels were transparent. No emotional filtering. No consensus blue. Every species visible as they were, bioluminescent threat indicators and chromatophore displays and pheromone releases and all the other mechanisms of honest communication that the Assembly's systems had suppressed for centuries in favor of managed presentation. The signing ceremony for the Open Horizon Compact. A new framework. Technology research must be shared, not banned. Species may develop independently, but all discoveries enter a public registry after 50 years. The lag was compromise. The lag was recognition that immediate transparency might prevent the risk-taking that led to breakthrough. But the transparency was guaranteed. The transparency was structural. The transparency could not be unilaterally revoked by those who controlled the archives. Zelkora signed first. He had not planned this. He had not sought this prominence. But when the stylus was presented, assembly standard, efficient, forgettable, he had reached into his pocket and retrieved his grandmother's tool, the stellar engineering instrument repurposed for teaching, the object he had carried without understanding why. The stylus was not designed for the signature interface. He had to adapt his grip, adjust his angle, accept the inefficiency of using a tool for a purpose it had not been designed for. The inefficiency was the point. The inefficiency was memory. The inefficiency was resistance to the optimization that led to forgetting. He wrote his name. Then he wrote, in Zelkothi script, the words his grandmother had taught him: "We built stars. We will build again." The preamble was read. 28 names. 7 minutes. When Tobias Keene's name was spoken, Rhea wrote in her paper notebook for the first time in 4 years. 1 line. She did not read it back. She did not need to. The line was, "The math works." Soren stood beside her. He had changed in 3 months. The anxious believer in galactic cooperation had become something else. Not cynical. Not hardened. Simply, precisely, aware of what cooperation required when the partners had unequal power. He had memorized the Zelkothi stellar equations. He recited one quietly, sub-vocalizing, trusting that Rhea would hear. Variable coherence in the 7th-dimensional tensor. Your grandmother's notation. Rhea turned to him. He would have checked your variables. I know. Soren's voice was steady. I fixed them. A young Kalari scientist approached. The Kalari were newer members, technologically curious, not yet fully integrated into the Assembly's consolidation systems. Her secondary eyelids flickered as she processed the scene, the human with paper, the Zelkothi with obsolete tools, the transparent panels showing species as they were rather than as they were managed to appear. How do your people keep building, she asked, when they tell you to stop? Rhea looked at her notebook. 4 pages, filled over 9 years, with waiting, with preparation, with the patience of knowing that the right moment would come. The 5th page, filled now, with confirmation that the waiting had been worth it. The remaining pages, still blank, still waiting, still full of possibility. We build, she said, because stopping was never their decision to make. Zelkora stood at the observation window in his new quarters, assigned by the Open Horizon Compact's provisional governance structure, larger than his previous space, better equipped, transparent in its systems in ways that would have made him uncomfortable 3 months ago. He was learning to live without the comfort of hidden channels. He was learning that transparency could be strength, if you had nothing to hide, if your secrets were no longer necessary. The memory coin was on his desk. He had retrieved it from Rhea, formally, as part of the Compact's archival process. It would be entered into the public registry, along with everything else. The mathematics it contained would be available to any species that wished to learn. The proof that 2 independent intelligences had found the same path would be proof that the path was real, was reachable, was not the proprietary property of any single institutional framework. He would miss the coin's secrecy. He would not miss what the secrecy had cost. His grandmother's stylus lay beside it. The 2 objects together, one carrying human mathematics in obsolete Zelkothi format, one carrying Zelkothi engineering in obsolete Zelkothi format. Both obsolete. Both functional. Both proof that obsolescence was a choice, not a fate, that the past could be repurposed rather than replaced, that memory was technology too important to delegate to institutional management. Rhea sat alone in her quarters. The viewport was open. Stars burned in the distance, indifferent to the compact sign below, permanent in their disregard for the temporary arrangements of species who would eventually learn to navigate between them more freely, more openly, more like neighbors than subjects. She thought of Tobias. Still in Black 14, but the gate's discovery had triggered a review of all assembly detainees. Extraction possible within 6 months. The math had worked. The math was still working, in ways he had not predicted, creating possibilities he had not designed. She thought of Matteo, now on the other side of the gate, building a new model ship with his son. The 12th figure would have a face now. The blankness would be filled. The crew would be complete. She thought of Freya, now teaching Zelkathi children their grandmother's equations, the mathematics of stellar engineering restored to the people who had created it, the cycle of memory breaking through the cycle of forgetting. She thought of Zelkora, signing with his grandmother's stylus, the obsolete tool repurposed for a new purpose, the past made present, the lost made found. She thought of the blank pages in her notebook. The waiting that continued. The building that had not stopped, that would not stop, that had never been contingent on permission. The stars were still there. They felt different now. Not closer exactly. Just more like something that belonged to everyone.